So, Crimes of the Future is the latest film from David Cronenberg, and I feel like this is the perfect film for people who have grown comfortable with David Cronenberg. If you've never seen a David Cronenberg film, he's known for doing his body horror type stuff. So you know the very creepy stuff like Scanners and and even his son Brandon Cronenberg has done like the same stuff with 2020's Possessor, which is just graphic and violent and sexual. And Crimes of the Future is all of that, while still being a great like crime film. It feels very much like a neo-noir detective film, while at the same time having a lot of that like psychosexual elements of body horror, as well as embracing a lot more of the sci-fi elements. Because I didn't realize it's been a long time since we've had like a David Cronenberg sci-fi film. Like I believe his last one was Existence, which was the one about where people have like a video game console that looks like a pulpy mess of flesh which you plug into your spine, and of course people have like sexual relations with the spine. So Crimes of the Future actually has like an amazing setting. So it takes place in this future where humans have evolved to a point where their pain receptors don't register everything and their bodies can endure a lot more pain. So now if people like get cut or they have their bodies like cut open and stuff like that, it doesn't hurt as much. In fact, it actually feels good. In fact, one of the catchphrases here, which you could actually kind of say is like a continuation of like a Videodrome, is that I forgot it off the I forgot what the phrase is, but it's basically that pain is the new sex. So basically, people get a lot more turned on in this universe by cutting open their body than they do actually having sex. In fact, at one point, when characters attempt to have like like sex with just like kissing and stuff like that, they're kind of like, oh, sorry, I'm not actually used to like the old sex, as it were. So naturally, this creates a very different world, and one of the most different aspects of it is the profession of Saul Tenser, played by Viggo Mortensen. Now, Saul is a very interesting person because he has what's known as accelerated evolution syndrome. What this basically means is that his body is growing extra organs that it doesn't need. So he has to have these organs removed regularly. So what does he do with that? He turns it into a performance. Yeah, it's basically like, this is a world where performance art is a big deal, and it all involves cutting up the body. So Saul's performances are done by his assistant called Caprice, played by Léa Seydoux. And she uses like this weird like autopsy device that's used for cutting up bodies, but they instead use it for like a big like a big show. It's like, I don't know, like you want to like relate back to like something like Nightmare Alley or something like that, where it's kind of like a little bit like a freak show. So basically, Caprice will use this device that kind of looks like a frog with buttons on it. It's so bizarre, to cut open Saul's body, take out organs, and then basically like put them on display like artwork. And everyone watches and videotapes, and they're all like fascinated by this. And then once the performance is over, Saul just like lays back, and they have like his organ displayed by him. He's like, "Hey, how you doing?" Like it's a big art gallery show. So this new world creates a whole bunch of new elements. So now there's a new system set up called the National Organ Registry that is trying to document people like Saul. So the registry is pretty small. It's only made up of about 2 people, Timlin and Whippet. And they're both kind of doing they admit that the work they're doing is a little bit illegal. Like they realize they can't quite film what they're doing here, and they can't quite advocate for what Saul's doing, but they still want to document him and keep track of him because he's basically another evolution in humanity. It's worth noting that Timlin is played by Kristen Stewart, who does an amazing job playing this sort of like anxious and erratic investigator who wants to learn and understand more about people like Saul, but is also very like cautious and very uncertain of how to handle people like Saul. She's like a nervous wreck in the film, but also kind of like very, you can tell she's very turned on by this whole experience in a weird sort of way. But at the same time, Saul ends up getting pulled into this battle over the body of a child. So this body turns up of a kid who has been born with an ability. Similar to Saul, he has like an evolution where he can consume plastic. And as it turns out, there's more people like this kid. In fact, the kid's father is part of a revolutionary group of people who can eat like toxic plastics. As they refer to it in the film, it's basically these people have learned to adapt to their toxic environment. So like it's the next evolutionary step. So the father is trying to convince Saul to use his autopsy machine to do an autopsy on the kid and reveal this evolutionary state so that it's not covered up by the police. But Saul is conflicted because, like, you know, you're asking us to do an autopsy as a performance on a dead soul without consent. And it's also a kid, which he has a lot of misgivings about. At the same time, there's a detective who's called, no joke, called Detective Cope, played by Welket Bongier. And the detective basically wants Saul to spy on this group and give them valuable information about it. And Saul is essentially caught up in all this, deciding, you know, what do I do? Do I turn these people in, or do I do the autopsy? And even when he makes a choice, finally, after having been deceived throughout the whole film, like, he's definitely being played by so many different people in this, that it's like this, it's weird. Like at first, even when you get caught up on this whole world about like the whole like eating plastic and cutting up organs and all that, and people taking pleasure in like digging blades into their feet and literally having sex scenes where they cut themselves up, even if you get used to all that, there's still like this very, very dense and elaborate story about trying to prevent human evolution in this kind of like this very neo-noir setting. And I love that aspect of it because like it's very much like if you're used to Cronenberg, you're gonna get used to this film really fast, especially for all the great design. I love the kind of like H.R. Giger style psychosexual design of all the contraptions and devices. Like Saul, nothing that Saul owns feels like it's of our world. Like the bed that he sleeps in is kind of like this descending hammock that has all these tendrils and tentacles that connect to his body and make him kind of feel pleasure and pain in weird ways. When he has to eat, which apparently is a rough ordeal for him, he has to sit in this chair that looks like it's entirely made of like bones and spines. And in order for his body to like properly eat, he has to be like jostled and like thrown from like side to side in order so that it'll go down his throat. And here's the thing, I gotta admit this too. Those scenes where Viggo Mortensen is in like the bone chair trying to like eat while like his body is jostled around, he's like struggling to like swallow down his food. That to me was like the most like skin crawling moment where it's like, ooh man, that's kind of like one of my worst fears, is like not being able to like swallow something like that and having like your air cut off. And hearing him talk during these scenes, it's just like, it's so creepy in a way. And keep in mind, this is a film where people's organs get cut up. Like the autopsy scene they get to is grotesque. You have people literally chopping up body parts. There's one scene where someone just like sewed ears to all the different parts of their bodies. And all that, maybe it's just because I'm kind of used to Cronenberg films, but getting to like the bone chair sequence just made my skin crawl. And that's why I love the film. Like, Cronenberg manages to find ways to tap into like the cerebral and grotesque areas of your mind that you didn't know made you feel weird in that way. So like in a sense, like I don't quite want to recommend this as like, if you've never seen a David Cronenberg film, do not jump into this. I would say start with scanners. That's decent. Maybe a little Videodrome to get used to it, and then maybe it's like a prep. Watch his son's film Possessor just to get more used to like the graphic nature, because I would say this film is not as graphic as Possessor in terms of like the sex and the gore, even though you do see a lot of organs and people's faces being cut up and all that. But surprisingly, this film actually has like little bits and pieces of humor in there, from just like subtle ways to like how they talk about like the old sex, to like the more like obvious ways. Like at one point, Saul is trying to like take in one of the performances of people who dabble in kind of like body horror art, and one of them has this whole performance where they're always talking about how we need to listen more in our society. So they basically sewn their eyes shut and they sew like ears all over their body, and they do this little dance. And Saul is just kind of like smirking at it, 'cause it's like okay, it's all for show though. You know, those ears don't really do anything. They're not really hearing anything, so it feels a little fake. So, whereas everything that Saul does is a part of him. Like he's literally putting himself on display in this, and taking parts of his body out and selling them as art, essentially, to a viewing public. So it's like this film made me feel weird in ways that I didn't expect a Cronenberg film to do. I thought like I'd seen it all with his films, but even after all these years, he still manages to craft a film that works so well at kind of grossing you out, but also kind of turning you on, but also kind of, you know, having that neo-noir edge to it, that where it feels like a detective film, which I guess is kind of the best way to describe this film, and why it's so weird and why I love it is that it's a neo-noir detective film, with grotesque bone chairs and organ harvesting and people eating plastic. And it's lovely.